Disorder having broken out.
Welcome everybody, and I would like to welcome Paul Sng to Praxis TV. Thanks very much for coming along.
Hiya.
Hiya. Paul is a filmmaker and a writer whose work focuses on people who challenge the status quo, and in particular amplifying the voices of people who've been neglected and marginalised in the arts and in the media. And he does so mainly through filmmaking, but also through literature and photography. And some of the films that you may have come across already are Sleaford Mods, Invisible Britain, Dispossession, The Great Social Housing Swindle, and Social Housing, Social Cleansing. And also Paul has recently published his first book, which is Invisible Britain, Portraits of Hope and Resilience, and that was published in 2018. So I know that you're currently sort of finalising a new project as well, Paul, so it'll be good to hear a little bit more about that in a bit. But I'd like to begin by asking you the first question that I always ask, and that is, are you yourself working class, and what defines you as working class rather than middle class, if so?
I mean, I kind of struggled with my identity growing up. You know, my family were working class, and being sort of mixed race, it was quite, you know, a difficult upbringing for me because, you know, my mum was a single mum, saw my dad at weekends, but it was a completely different culture. And I didn't really meet any other, you know, Chinese kids until I was in my teens and experienced a lot of racism as a youngster. A lot of it from, you know, like working class kids. And so I didn't want to be Chinese. I didn't want to be working class. And I kind of wanted to be white, but I wasn't. And I never really fitted in with white kids. I never really fitted in with other children of color. And so growing up, there was a massive struggle for me internally about, you know, not wanting to be working class, not wanting to be Chinese, and then, but not being white and not being middle class. And it wasn't until I was kind of in my, you know, sort of late teenage years that I began to accept who I was, you know, and then became, you know, proud of my mixed race heritage and proud of being working class. And I think, you know, now I would, you know, be able to easily, you know, identify as working class. And I think what brings that to, you know, the meaning of being working class is different to everybody. But I think for me, you know, it's a cultural identity, and it's there in terms of, you know, things like the kind of art that I like, the kind of food that I was brought up eating. It's there in terms of politics, of solidarity. Financially, I mean, I'm certainly probably more working class than I was when I had a regular job. You know, as a filmmaker, I earn less money than I did, you know, when I worked in an office job. Certainly when you work on some film projects, you do so many hours. And particularly in the last film I've made, which was about Poly Styrene, the amount of hours that Celeste and I put in, and our producers and everybody else, I mean, if you totted it all up, we'd have probably earned more money from, you know, having a paper round or something, because the arts are criminally underfunded, particularly documentary. So I mean, all of those things, I think, inform my identity. And I do think, it's funny because I do have friends that sometimes say to me, you know, you're not working class anymore because you're a film director and that's a middle class profession. And I would always argue against that, because you know, you can argue from a financial point of view, and you can also argue from a cultural point of view that, you know, there are working class filmmakers, there are, you know, working class artists across the board. And just because you become an artist, you don't immediately become middle class. That's a crazy idea, I think.
Yeah. So it's like, I don't know if you'd agree, but it looks to me as if a lot of the time being working class, it's a package of things. And obviously, you know, if you're from a minority ethnic background, that's another factor into the mix. Same as if you're female, that's another factor into the mix in terms of sort of disadvantage or different forms of exclusion or, you know, or discrimination. But there's a number of different factors, and one of them that quite often defines working class people is that they don't have as much agency within, well, we don't have as much agency within the work that we do. So usually there's someone telling you what to do, there's someone above you, whereas if you're in the arts, possibly if you're in academia or something creative, that ceases to be the case because you've got more agency over what you're choosing to do with your work. But there's still tons of other things that still apply, that still make you working class rather than middle class. You still don't have a whole bunch of advantages, you know, that you would have if you were middle class, whether it's connections in the right places, or, you know, or things that define you in terms of like accent or the clothes you wear, or like you said, the food that you eat, or whatever. So class it's a complex thing. It's not a simple, you know, there's so many different aspects to it.
Yeah, I mean, completely. I mean, one of the things that I'm sometimes aware of is, particularly in the film world, is you'll go into a room and most of the people in that room will be middle class. A lot of the people that work in funding, a lot of gatekeepers to the industry, broadcasters, are all middle class or upper class. And there's a certain code of behaviour that, you know, you if I was, you know, seeing my family, you know, who kind of grew up on the Walworth Road around that area in a pub, it's a completely different way that you would act to how you would act, you know, in the film world. And it's kind of, I mean, everybody, you know, I don't think you can sort of have this lumpen description of somebody when they're all going to conform to a certain set of behaviours. But I am always aware that, you know, sometimes I find myself, I'll be speaking differently to the way I would talk to, you know, working class people that I've known all my life, to when you're speaking to trying to pitch a film to someone. You kind of, a little bit inside of you sometimes dies at the way that you have to change and modify your behaviour. You know, you kind of feel, you know, not that you're betraying who you are, but you have to adjust how you speak. They don't adjust how they speak to you, you know. I mean, sometimes they do if they want to try and get in with you or express that they're also working class, but it is complex, as you say.
Bob Mortimer, he does this thing, doesn't he? It's almost like a parody of that kind of thing when people attempt to upskill or to upgrade their culture. Yeah. What's he called? Sorry.
I think is he called the Train Guy?
That's right, like the Train Guy. And he's talking about his cappuccino or something like that, and it's like he's on his mobile phone. Yeah. It's like yeah, I can understand that what you're saying. It's weird within politics as well, because even within the Labour Party, which traditionally was the party, the go-to political home of the working class, that's all changed, and it's now, you know, studies have shown that's the membership's 70% middle class now. So yeah, I mean, it's quite shocking, really. What do you have any view about? I mean, like, a lot of your work is around challenging the status quo and elevating those voices that have become increasingly invisible. So what proportion of the work that you choose to do focuses on class? Is it a whole range of things that you're looking at, or is there a large percentage of the work that's around class?
I mean, as you were saying earlier, you know, there is an intersectionality around class, race, and gender, and you know, from some of the projects I've worked on, you often, you know, I try to, you know, work with people that, you know, fit into that criteria. So the first photo book that I did, first invisible written photo book, it was sort of this kind of state of the nation that was focusing on the impact of austerity, deindustrialization, you know, heightened sense of British identity. And, you know, I think it was made in the wake of Brexit. And I think a lot of the problems that came out of Brexit, you know, people were blaming, you know, the white working class for voting for Brexit. And we've seen research, you know, from Danny Darling. And then there was an article, I think, published earlier in the week, which shows that it wasn't caused by, you know, the working classes. And I think some of the work I try to do tries to sort of, you know, break down stereotypes. That there's this idea that, you know, a white working class person in Hartlepool is going to think a certain way. And I think seeing what's happening with the Labour Party at the moment, and I think I've been quite disappointed with Keir Starmer. I think, you know, Labour has focus groups, all you know, political parties have focus groups, but I think some of these focus groups are coming back and they're saying, okay, this is what the red wall voters that went from, you know, Labour to Tories think, you know, and painting them as these stereotypical flag shagging, you know, robots that, you know, will suddenly flock back to Labour if Keir Starmer, you know, starts showing that he's patriotic and all this other stuff. And I find him quite disingenuous. I don't think for a second believe that some of the things he's coming out with, he actually feels in his heart. And then, you know, I wasn't a massive, you know, fan of, I'm not a massive fan of the Labour Party full stop, to be honest with you. I don't vote for any political party, you know, it's not where I am. And I don't like labels on people. I find labels really not very useful. I think they only divide us. But one of the things I liked about Jeremy Corbyn was that you knew that what he said, he meant it. You know, he was genuinely, he's often, you know, believed in the causes that were true to himself, you know. And I think with Keir Starmer, you know, when I look at him and some of the things he's coming out with around, trying to portray this idea of being, a monarchist, which I think is complete rubbish. That he, I think he probably believes in a republic. There is evidence that he used to think that. I'm sure in his heart he probably still does. And I think the problem is with politicians, and it's not just the Labour Party, is that they try and second guess what working class people think as some lump and mass, and they get it wrong. And the Labour movement is now, certainly in the Labour Party, predominantly middle class people trying to speak and shout over working class voices. And I think one of the great tragedies of our time is that if there was the machinery and the muscle and the support behind an organisation that could harness what I would say was the authentic voice of the working class, it'd be carried to power. But that isn't the Labour Party anymore, and it's people sort of call people that are working class that vote for Tories, they find that shocking. And it is shocking, but I mean, you have to try and understand why they do that. And rather than like pointing the finger at them and calling them stupid and ignorant, you have to think that they've been fouled by Labour. They were fouled by New Labour. New Labour did a lot of good things, of course, but they could have transformed society with those majorities, those huge majorities, and they didn't. It's fine to say, they did a lot of good. Of course they did, but we could have had a society like some of the Scandinavian countries, where you've got a really strong welfare state, where nobody falls through the safety net, but instead we let the Tories in, and now I can't see Labour winning the next election. No way. I can see Boris Johnson gaining votes, and that's it's a disaster. The situation we're in right now, we're sleepwalking, I think, into dystopia.
Is that, in your view, is there a concerted effort to maintain capitalism? Is fooling the working class through perhaps, draping everything in flags and things like that? Is that a way of trying to con the working class into voting for something that effectively enables capitalism to continue, and it's going to harm the working class worse than anybody else?
Yeah, I think it's exactly it. I mean, capitalism to a lot of working class people isn't a bad thing.
No,
a lot of people, think that free market economics benefits them. I think, this idea that the working class people hate capitalism, is wrong. A lot of working class people do love capitalism. A lot of working class people, want to buy nice things. They want to buy them cheaply. They believe in the free market. They fall for that idea that if you work hard, if you save up your money, that you too can get out of being working class. Let's not forget that there are working class people that don't wear being working class like a badge.
Absolutely.
There's quite people that want to be middle class. My nan was one of them. We used to call her Mrs. Bouquet because
I had one of them.
She spoke in a different accent. She's from Camberwell, from New Cross, working class as they come, but she spoke in an accent that was middle class, and she had a set of behaviour that was trying to sort of aspire to be middle class. She wanted to, the term, people want to, in inverted commas, better themselves. So I think, this idea that, every working class person that, falls for the kind of, this sense of patriotism, this kind of Spitfire nationalism, then I'm always wary of like condemning people like that. I think you've just got to, try and have the conversation with them, and not just tell them that they're wrong, and not just tell them that they're stupid, and not just, criticize them and saying, that they're having the what's the expression? The wall pulled over their eyes. Is that the expression? I don't know.
That's it. Yeah. So people don't like to feel that they've been conned, and it's really difficult, isn't it, trying to get around that in a way that doesn't offend people. But the media is so powerful. I mean, that's why you do what you do, isn't it?
Yeah, I mean, when I make films and books and things, we work with people, and the idea is that, they're part of the process rather than you make things that are, purely about them. It's a process where, you hopefully you have some time to get to know them a bit, to earn their trust, and you make them part of the process, So with the first book I did, and with the second book that I'm putting together at the moment, it's basically people's stories and a portrait of them, and everything's in their own words. We do the interview with them, the interview gets transcribed, we edit a story, we send it back to them. Is there anything you want to change? Have you represented yourself, you're happy with here? And then they send it back, and sometimes they're just fine with it. Other times they think, I shouldn't have said that. And they can, we take everything out they don't want in there, we tweak it, we send it back, and they have final sign off on it, because I think otherwise, you run the risk of misrepresenting people. And, in films, it's not always easy to sort of send back rushes to like loads and loads of people, but in a book it's much easier because it's just, an email with some text, and then they just send it back. Whereas if you've got a film and you're sending someone rushes to watch, and so part of the reason we're doing the book was because I wanted to work in a more direct way, for people to be able to, express their truth directly, rather than, have my lens on it or the editor's lens on it. Because there's always a level of distortion there. Even if your, intention is to represent someone truthfully, there's always going to be, your perspective on it far more than theirs, because you've made it, you've put it together.
So what about, so things like Benefit Street and things like, I mean, I haven't watched it, I've only heard about it, but where there are mainstream productions which trash working class culture and they just micro focus on certain elements within that, they're still telling the truth about, in one sense, about people's lives and people's attitudes. But when people have been I don't know, sort of demoralized, excluded, ignored, neglected over decades in the way that the working class have, that's obviously what you are going to see. And it's kind of like, how do we tell truthful stories about the working class and make them contextual? Because I think that's what's missing, isn't it, from things like Benefit Street, is that there's never that inclusion of the context that's gone before politically. Is that something that you are able to do within your work?
Yeah, I mean, I think the key to it is being, working class, and to work with other people that are working class, because I think, a working class lens is going to be, most likely very different to a middle class lens.
Yeah.
And of course, the people that make programs like Benefit Street are generally middle class. They're commissioned by middle class people. They're made by middle class people. And, at that point, you have a tension between someone that's working class, that's having a film made about them, and someone that's middle class that really, perhaps doesn't understand what it means to be working class and what it means to, to show someone in a certain light. And I don't necessarily think, I've not watched every single episode of Benefit Street. One was enough for me to know that I just thought it was crap. And that it was, it was stigmatizing people, and people watch it and then, will look at that, and they're not, not everyone's going to say, oh, all working class people are like that. But it does, sort of promote a sense of there being a disproportionate number of people that are claiming benefits, that, that there's a whole kind of underclass of people that are around that are trying to scam the government out of money. And it's of course ridiculous, but people believe this stuff, and that becomes, when it's prime time entertainment on television, it becomes a dominant narrative. And of course, through that, politicians are able to do things like, demolish council estates and make those places undesirable in other people's minds as places that are somehow full of people that are scroungers, and places that aren't really, desirable to live in. Whereas the actual fact of council housing is, in its heyday, when it was new, everybody wanted to live there, whether they were working class or not. It was seen as, safe, secure, affordable housing. And of course, this, Tories and New Labour put everything into free market economics, where, everyone should be expected to own a house. And of course, people want to own houses. You're not going to stop that. That's the kind of tenure that people desire. But you do need something else as an alternative, to private rent market and to owning a house. And that should be, a very strong social housing landscape. And unfortunately, we don't have that. And Benefit Street is one of the key contributions to that, I think.
And in a way, I suppose that brings us back to what you were saying about the Mrs. Bouquet nan. Maybe every working class, or a lot of working class people, more than we realise, had at least one Mrs. Bouquet nan. I had one. My granddad was like on the tugs. He worked on the tugboats on the Mersey, but because they'd moved from a council house and they'd managed to own, a bungalow in a nice area, all of a sudden everything changed. But that, it's a divide and rule type of media, isn't it? So it encourages working class people to see themselves as above and separate from other people within the working class, whereas we used to be one. There used to be more solidarity, and there used to be more of a sense of belonging, really, to a particular class, and a pride, which I don't know how we reverse that, really, but it seems a shame.
Yeah, I think you're right. It's interesting, because there are things that traditionally were culturally, working class, going to the football, certain sort of types of fashion, and over time those things have been co-opted by the middle class. Football is now really, really expensive. This Super League business, you've seen that football has been all about money since like the 1992 when the Premier League started, but it's obviously now got to a point where that money rules every single decision that's made. And they refer to the kind of older fans, a lot of whom will be working class, as legacy fans. So they've already consigned them to the past. And I think the problem with our culture being taken over and co-opted by middle class people is ultimately it gets diluted down. But in terms of our level of representation, it's much harder now for us to get through. The wave of working class artists that came up through the 60s and the 70s and in the 80s to a large part has decreased. And I think it is going to hopefully begin to get better. I mean, the BFI are now recognising class as a protected characteristic in the same way that the race is, and that's a really good thing. That was largely the work of a man called Danny Lee, who advises the BFI on social class and on these sort of things. And Danny and the people that he's working with, Dave O'Brien, doing really good work around class in the screen industries, and it is beginning to, I think, improve. But there's a long way to go, definitely.
Wow, that's really interesting. I hadn't realised that. I mean, it's good that it does seem as if people are starting to talk about class again and about the working class, and really, I don't know, is it worrying that working class people are so quickly animated about the football and the Super League and feeling like their sport's been taken away from them? Whereas, as you said, it probably happened years ago, in effect for a lot of working class people, but they're more animated about that than the fact that, basically working class people have been dying at around about twice the rate of middle class people and affluent people through the COVID pandemic for a whole range of class related factors. And obviously that intersects with race as well. But people are more animated about football than they are about that. That's been swept under the rug with virtually no challenge from working class people. How do we, is there anything that can be done through media, through the work that you do, to highlight some of those things and get people to be as animated about those things as they would have been in the past?
I mean, I think the role of the media, I think, is, in some ways it's decreased. I think the print media, their influence has decreased because print media is in smaller circulation. It's all online, which isn't to say that papers like the Sun, the Mirror, still don't have a large influence. But I think where do people get their views from? I mean, where do people make their mind up? It's a combination, I think, of news and social media now. People see things on Twitter, they see things on Facebook, whatever, and they believe them. And in this world of kind of alternative facts, things like documentary are important, but who gets to make these documentaries? Who gets to then broadcast them? How do they get seen? And it's I think we're in a period where it's an exciting period. It's brilliant in that it's cheaper to make things. It's easier to sort of put them out on a platform because things like YouTube and Vimeo, you can put things out. But the key is how you kind of then, disseminate that information and how you reach an audience. And I think there are quite a few sort of independent filmmakers, and there are people that make really good work that, get on the BBC and get their work out there. But in terms of how we change things, I think I don't know. I think it's a kind of long-term thing. I don't think there's going to be some sudden moment where we go, oh, everything's changed. I think it's going to be something that will come out of the blue, something that is unexpected. I don't know what that will be. I think it could be, there are moments where there's unrest, whether it's the poll tax riots, that happened here in the 90s, whether it's things like in America, Rodney King, that, people have an awareness that, things aren't right and do things to challenge it. And I don't know, there seems to be, I've always felt, since about 2010, that it feels like something's going to kick off. And I still feel that, but in what shape or form that takes and what happens as a result of it, I really don't know. I mean, I think certainly the police and will crack down on it really heavily. I think we've seen increased levels of investment in like private security forces. I mean, I don't see there being a revolution in traditional terms. I think it might be something that's a little bit more, I don't know, subtle, if that makes sense.
Yeah. I mean, I feel that there's a lot of intelligence across the working class still, but that we've been numbed out you know, we've just been numbed out really, because we've lost our political home effectively. And as you say, you know, there's been a lot of brainwashing within the media, and there's a lot of spangly things that grab our attention. Capitalism does that, you know, but I feel as if it's still there. We're just waiting for it to sort of reawaken. Something needs to reawaken it, and I do think that will happen. So I agree with you on that. But I guess in the meantime, we just need to keep nudging in whatever way, shape or form we can, which is what you do with your work. So if you could, if you'd be happy to send me any links or anything that you think would be interesting for people to look up, that would be really, really cool. And I'd just like to thank you again for coming on today. I know you've got another meeting to go to now, so thanks for giving us your time, and it was really great to meet you and speak to you.
You too.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Democracy.